Lucas had always been a rational man. He trusted logic, evidence, and truth. When a major event made headlines and changed the lives of thousands of people, he believed the official explanations. It was easier to accept what seemed clear and unquestionable. However, as the days passed, Lucas began to notice small inconsistencies in the information being shared. Something didn't make sense, and like a flash of lightning, he realized that many of the answers he was being given were too superficial. He began to search for more information, going beyond what was being reported in the mainstream media. The pieces of information began to come together, and he realized that there was something much bigger behind the event. As he tried to investigate further, he came across conspiracy theories and misinformation circulating on the internet. Some of these theories seemed so absurd that he almost gave up, but something inside him kept pushing him forward. Lucas couldn't ignore what he felt. Something was wrong, and he had to find out the truth, even if it meant challenging everything he had believed. As Lucas dug deeper into his research, he began to face obstacles. Reliable sources began to disappear, and the few journalists who were investigating the case in depth were discredited, labeled paranoid, or conspiracy theorists. The institutions of power he had always respected began to act evasively, making it increasingly difficult to find clear answers. His friends and family began to suspect his obsession with the event, and he felt increasingly isolated. But the truth, he believed, was out there, and he would not give up. He came across a small group of people who were also independently investigating the event. They shared information, reviewed documents, and discussed what had actually happened. However, they soon realized that they were being watched. Something much bigger than simple manipulation of information was at play. The idea that someone was controlling the narratives and manipulating people's minds to hide the truth was becoming increasingly clear. Lucas was beginning to understand the extent of what he was up against. He now knew that the truth was being actively hidden, and he would be the next target if he didn't stop his search. As Lucas progressed, he began to realize that he could no longer trust conventional sources of information. Media manipulation became increasingly clear. The narrative presented to the public was being carefully tailored to serve certain interests, and the truth was being distorted or suppressed. To many, the idea of such large-scale manipulation seemed absurd, but to Lucas, each new discovery seemed to confirm that he was on the right track. He could no longer ignore the evidence, and it made him question the extent to which he had been manipulated throughout his life. Things began to get more dangerous when Lucas gained access to a confidential document that revealed that several major corporations and governments were involved in fabricating the official version of events. He knew it could be the key to unmasking the truth, but he also knew it would put his life at risk. He was no longer sure who he could trust, and as his search brought him closer to the truth, he felt more alone and vulnerable. He had to act quickly before any attempts to expose it were thwarted. However, as he dug deeper, Lucas began to realize how difficult it would be to expose all of this without being discredited. The lies were so entrenched and well defended that he knew the authorities would react fiercely. Lucas began to encounter technical difficulties, with access to documents restricted and vital information being erased as he found it. He felt like he was being watched, as if the search for the truth itself was becoming a game of cat and mouse. He knew that something much bigger was at stake, and that exposing the truth could mean much more than he had imagined. The turning point came when Lucas was contacted by an anonymous person who claimed to know everything he was investigating. The person offered more information and suggested that he find a way to share his findings before it was too late. Fear began to take hold of Lucas. He knew that the truth could destroy far more than he was prepared to deal with, and now he had a choice to make: continue his search or fall into the trap of even deeper lies. But he knew deep down that he had no choice but to fight for the truth, no matter the cost. The pressure on Lucas intensified as he continued to gather more data and develop a strategy to expose what was happening. He knew he had to be careful. With each step, the risk grew, but he could not back down. The threats began to come more directly, and he received unexpected visits from people who wanted to dissuade him from continuing his investigation. But Lucas was undeterred. He had solid evidence of information manipulation in his hands, and he was more determined than ever to expose it to the public. One afternoon, as Lucas was reviewing the documents he had obtained, he realized something important. The data he had been deliberately disorganized and retouched. The original versions of the documents had been altered before they reached him, and some of the most relevant clues had been erased. he realized that there was something even deeper at play, perhaps a global system of information control that meant he was dealing not just with lies, but with a carefully orchestrated, manipulated reality. This made him even more determined to find the truth, but also more vulnerable to attack. From that point on, Lucas began to trust a select few, knowing that any contact he made could be monitored. He began sending small pieces of information to independent journalists and trusted sources, so that he would have a safety net in case something went wrong. He knew that in order to expose everything he had discovered, he would need the support of a broader base, something bigger than just him. But that base was beginning to form in small circles, where people were as desperate as he was to reveal the truth. As the days went by, Lucas became increasingly aware of the misinformation efforts. He began to notice patterns in how the media covered the events he was investigating, and how any information that even came close to the truth was quickly discredited. He also noticed that those who tried to question the official versions were systematically persecuted, labeled as radicals or conspiracy theorists. This behavior only reinforced his certainty that he was close to discovering something vital, but the fear of being silenced grew with each passing day. Lucas's situation began to become increasingly tense. The threats, which had previously been indirect, now became direct and much more concrete. One day, as he was leaving his house, he noticed that he was being followed. This was no longer a simple feeling of paranoia, it was a certainty. He knew that those involved in covering up the truth were becoming desperate to silence him, and he also knew that he was at the center of a web of manipulation much larger than he had imagined. With each passing day, he felt that time was running out. Then Lucas received a crucial piece of information. An anonymous hacker had contacted him and offered him access to secret files that revealed the large-scale manipulation of the event he was investigating. The offer seemed like a once-in-a-lifetime chance to finally get the definitive proof he had been searching for, but it also put him at even greater risk. He knew that by accessing these files, he would not only be exposing himself more, but also putting the lives of whoever helped him at risk. The decision was far from simple. Despite his fear, Lucas could not ignore the fact that the truth was within his reach. He decided to move forward. Using a secure system, he accessed the files and began to examine the evidence. What he found was even more alarming than he had imagined. The documents revealed a global plan to manipulate public perception and control narratives, with powerful organizations working together to shape the opinions of the masses. The information was devastating, and he knew that if he managed to release it all, the consequences would be enormous. Anxiety mixed with excitement, Lucas knew he now had a real chance to change everything, to expose the web of lies that had been carefully constructed over the years. But at the same time, he felt the weight of responsibility that this entailed. He was about to destroy lives, careers, and destroy trust in the institutions that many people still respected. Doubt began to creep into his mind. Was the truth really more important than the peace that many still believed they had? He could no longer separate emotion from reason, and the decision to act or retreat seemed to be a complex moral dilemma. The tension reached its peak when Lucas finally made the decision to expose the information. He knew it was dangerous, but the truth had to come out. With the help of some independent journalists he had contacted throughout his investigation, he began preparing to release the documents and evidence that proved the manipulation and hidden interests behind the event. Lucas knew that by doing so, he would be putting his life at risk, but he also knew that this was the only way to ensure that lies would no longer rule people's minds. However, as he prepared for publication, something unexpected happened. The sources who had promised support began to back down, pressured by threats from powerful figures who had their own interests in maintaining the lie. Lucas found himself isolated once again, but the pain of loneliness did not stop him. With each step he took, the pressure increased, and he began to realize that he had become a target, not only for the institutions involved, but also for people who, even if they did not know the truth, were willing to discredit him. He was facing the greatest dilemma of his life. One night, while reviewing the final details of the publication, Lucas received an unexpected visit. One of the journalists he had contacted, with whom he still had some trust, showed up at his door, pale and nervous. He had been contacted by people who wanted to know what Lucas was up to. The journalist, fearing for the safety of his family, begged Lucas to reconsider. But deep down, he knew that the truth could no longer be held back. even if it meant great risk to everyone involved. With the support of just a few, Lucas was finally able to release the evidence. He had the documents shared on secure platforms, ensuring that as many people as possible had access to the information before it was deleted or censored. The reaction was immediate. Part of the population was in shock, unable to believe what was being revealed. Another part, however, refused to accept the truth, preferring to continue believing the official version. What seemed like a victory for Lucas turned into a battle for credibility as he faced the weight of the consequences of his decision. With the release of the documents, Lucas knew there was no turning back. He became a controversial figure, the target of attacks from all sides. Those who had supported him in the beginning were now afraid to associate their names with him, fearing the reprisals that would come from powerful people. He was discredited, called a liar and a conspiracy theorist, but deep down, he knew that the truth was within his reach, even if many refused to see it. The external pressures were immense, and he felt that his name would never be the same again. However, he also knew that he had done what he believed was right. The search for truth, which had begun as simple doubts, now became a symbol of resistance. Lucas did not know what the future held for him, but he was determined to face the consequences, no matter how harsh they might be. He was no longer the victim who passively accepted the lies of the world around him. He had chosen to fight for the truth, and that, in some way, made him stronger than any threat he could face. He finally understood that although the price of truth was high, he would rather live with the scars of reality than die in the lie that so many still believed.